The lock engaged with a sound too soft to be a warning. Rowan felt it before he heard it, the shift in air, the way silence thickened, the instinctive pause in his step. The door behind him clicked once, final and neat, and none of the three men inside the room turned around. That was the first wrong thing. He stood there, briefcase still in his hand, waiting for someone to acknowledge the moment. A joke, a glance, anything that said the sound meant nothing. Instead, the men remained where they were, one by the table, one near the window that didn't open, one standing just slightly off-center, closer to the door than the others. Rowan swallowed. He had been in rooms with powerful people before, boardrooms, back halls, places where voices dropped and decisions cost lives, but those rooms always hummed, phones buzzing, lights whirring, the low reassurance of exits and schedules. Room 909 was quiet in a way that listened back. The triplets finally turned, not together, not abruptly, as if each had decided, separately, that now was the moment. They didn't smile. They didn't threaten him either. That was the second wrong thing. "Mr. Hale," one of them said calmly. "Soren," if Rowan remembered the file correctly. His tone was polite enough to pass for kindness. "Thank you for coming." Rowan nodded, because that was what compliance auditors did when they felt off balance. He took 2 steps forward, instinctively mapping the room. Table, 4 chairs, 1 camera dome in the corner, inactive, supposedly, no visible clock. Then the man near the door moved. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't sudden. Brax, Rowan knew the name without knowing why, shifted his weight and stood directly between Rowan and the exit. He didn't look at him while doing it, just adjusted his stance, like a habit learned long ago. Rowan noticed before he understood. Something cold slid into his chest. "This won't take long," Rowan said, hating the thinness in his own voice. "I'm here to verify a ledger and—" "No," the third man said quietly. "Ilya." His gaze was steady, assessing, already elsewhere. "You're here to listen." Rowan stopped speaking. No one raised their voice. No one explained. The absence of urgency pressed harder than shouting ever could. He set his briefcase down slowly, careful not to make noise, suddenly aware of how loud small movements sounded in a sealed space. He reached for his phone. No signal. He frowned, thumb tapping the screen once, twice. Manhattan never dropped signal this completely. He checked again, then looked up, heat crawling up his neck. Brax was watching him now, not staring. Watching. Rowan moved toward the door, casual, testing, his hand closed around the handle. He turned it gently. Nothing. No resistance. No give. Just dead. A laugh threatened to escape him, too sharp, too brittle. He swallowed it back. "Is there a security override?" he asked. "Sometimes hotels—" "There isn't," Soren said. Rowan's pulse kicked harder. "Then how long is the lock cycle?" Silence. Ilya's eyes flicked to the ceiling. Brax didn't move at all. Rowan tried the handle again, harder this time. Still nothing. He stepped back, scanning the walls, the table, the corners. No panel, no timer, no blinking reassurance that this was temporary. Understanding arrived slowly. Not panic. Not yet. Containment. This wasn't a meeting. It was a decision already made, and as Rowan stood there, boxed in by calm faces and a door that refused to acknowledge him, one thought settled heavy and unwanted in his chest. If you've ever ignored a wrong thing because it was quieter than the rest, if you've ever told yourself silence was safer, stay. Because room 909 doesn't open for people who look away. The first thing Rowan noticed was the water. It appeared beside his briefcase without announcement, a glass set carefully within reach, condensation already gathering at the base. He hadn't asked for it. He was certain of that. Yet there it was. Clear, cold, considerate. "Please," Soren said gently, gesturing toward the chair nearest the table. "Sit. You've had a long day." Rowan hesitated. Standing felt safer. Sitting felt like agreement. Still, the silence pressed again, expectant, and he lowered himself into the chair with controlled slowness, every muscle tight as wire. The room shifted almost imperceptibly. Ilya adjusted the thermostat. Rowan felt the air cool by a degree, just enough to register comfort. Soren loosened his cufflinks. Small gestures, human ones, the kind meant to soften edges, It worked, just enough to make Rowan uneasy with himself. You're overreacting, he told himself. No one has touched you. No one has threatened you. They're being polite. That thought made his stomach twist. Politeness required witnesses. This room had none. Soren leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. You look tired, he said, like an observation, not a judgment. How many audits did you finish last quarter? Rowan answered automatically. Numbers were safe. Structure was safe. 17. That's more than most, Soren said, nodding. You must be thorough. Rowan didn't miss the emphasis. Not efficient, not ambitious. Thorough. Ilya watched him over steepled fingers, saying nothing. His gaze didn't linger, didn't pry, but it catalogued. Rowan felt measured in quiet increments, like inventory. And Brax hadn't sat down. He remained near the door, arms loose at his sides, body angled just enough that Rowan could see him without turning his head. Not looming, not relaxed either. Ready, without showing readiness. Rowan realized with a small jolt that Brax had positioned himself so the others didn't have to think about the door at all. The glass of water sweated slowly. Rowan wrapped his fingers around it, grounding himself in the chill. I was told this was a routine verification, Rowan said. He hated how reasonable it sounded, like he was the one misunderstanding. If there's an issue, I can document it and escalate through proper channels. Soren smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. We're past channels. The word landed heavier than it should have. Ilya shifted his attention briefly to Brax. Not a look of command. A check-in. Brax inclined his head once, almost imperceptibly. Rowan caught it. Something passed between them without sound, without explanation, and Rowan felt suddenly, acutely out of place, like he'd stepped into a conversation that started long before he arrived. You care about doing things right, Soren continued. That's why you're here. Rowan felt the trap forming, even as a part of him leaned toward the praise. I care about accuracy, he corrected. Of course, Soren said smoothly. Accuracy has consequences. Rowan's throat tightened. He took a sip of water to buy time. His hand shook, just slightly. He noticed Brax notice. Brax reached out then, not toward Rowan, toward the window blind, adjusting it a fraction so the glare softened. The movement was small, practical, protective. Rowan's chest ached with something he didn't have a name for. Why does this feel worse than cruelty? He wondered. Why does kindness make me feel like I owe them something? The answer hovered, unspoken. Soren slid a thin folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of Rowan. Inside, photographs waited, edges worn, corners bent like they'd been handled often. Rowan knew what he'd see before he opened it. He looked at Brax once more. Brax met his eyes this time. No warning, no reassurance, just presence. Rowan opened the folder. And if you're already telling yourself you'd have walked away sooner, if you think you'd never sit in a room like this and let politeness buy your silence, don't leave yet, because what Rowan saw next would make staying feel unbearable, and leaving feel impossible. The first photograph showed a house with its front door torn clean off. Not broken, removed. Rowan stared at it longer than necessary, waiting for context to soften the image. It didn't. The house sat crooked on its foundation, windows boarded, the lawn overgrown like abandonment had taken root overnight. He turned the page. A family of 4 stood in front of a chain-link fence, everything they owned piled behind them in plastic bags. The youngest child clutched a stuffed animal so worn its color was gone. The mother's mouth was open mid-sentence, caught forever in a moment Rowan could almost hear. He stopped breathing. These properties, Soren said quietly, were seized through shell acquisitions certified as non-hostile transitions. Rowan's ears rang. He knew the language. He had written some of it himself. That can't be right, he said automatically, the reflex of a man trained to correct errors. Those filings were reviewed. The entities were compliant. Compliant, Ilya echoed, testing the word like a thin blade. Rowan swallowed and turned another page. An elderly man sitting on a curb, a closed factory gate, a handwritten eviction notice taped crookedly to a door. Each image punched deeper than the last, not because they were shocking, but because they were familiar. He recognized the file numbers scribbled in the corners. His. I didn't know, Rowan said. The words felt weak the moment they left his mouth. He hated that, hated how easily he reached for innocence when the evidence was staring back at him. No one argued, that was worse. Soren leaned back slightly, giving Rowan space he didn't deserve. "We believe you." Rowan looked up sharply. Belief felt like accusation, wearing a gentler face. "You followed procedure," Ilya added. "You did what the system asked of you." Rowan closed the folder with shaking hands. His chest felt too tight for air. "Then why am I here?" Brax answered. "Our mother," he said quietly, voice low enough that Rowan had to lean in to hear it, "cleaned rooms like this one." Rowan froze. Brax's gaze remained on the wall, not on Rowan. Hotels, offices, places where important decisions were made by people who never noticed her unless she missed a spot. The words were flat, unadorned. They hurt more because of it. "She taught us that power isn't loud," Brax continued. "It doesn't announce itself, it just moves things. Paper. People." Rowan's throat burned. "She used to say silence was the most expensive thing in the world," Brax finished, "because someone always pays for it." The room felt smaller. Rowan opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain audits and guidelines and the impossibility of seeing everything, but the excuses tasted rotten before they reached his tongue. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry." The word dropped into the space between them, fragile and useless. No one had accused him, no one had demanded an apology. That made it worse. Rowan bowed his head, hands clenched together, trying to steady himself. The photographs sat on the table like open wounds. He felt complicit in a way no training had prepared him for. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, a sharp mechanical click followed, metal on metal, precise and final. Rowan looked up just as the door handle twitched and went still. Dead. The room exhaled something cold. And if you've ever realized too late that doing your job wasn't the same as doing what was right, if you've ever felt guilt settle in your bones instead of your thoughts, don't look away now. Because room 909 was about to decide what that guilt would cost him. The intercom crackled to life like it had been listening the entire time. Rowan flinched before the sound fully formed, his body reacting faster than his mind. The voice that followed was smooth, unhurried, almost amused. "Good evening," it said. "I was wondering how long it would take you to notice." Rowan's pulse roared in his ears. "Who is this?" A soft chuckle answered him. "Names are such intimate things, but since you're already trapped together, we might as well be polite." A pause. Measured. "Marrow Kincaid." The name hit the room like a dropped glass. Soren's jaw tightened. Ilya's eyes went cold. Brax moved. Not abruptly, not aggressively. He stepped closer to Rowan, close enough that Rowan became aware of warmth at his side, of breath that wasn't his own. They didn't touch, but Rowan's shoulders eased despite himself, and that frightened him more than the voice. "You shouldn't be here," Soren said into the ceiling, calm but sharp at the edges. "Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be," Kincaid replied. "Unlike Mr. Hale." Rowan felt the words turn toward him, wrap around him. He straightened instinctively. "If this is about an audit dispute, there are legal channels." "Still clinging to procedure," Kincaid interrupted gently. "That's what makes you useful." Rowan's stomach dropped. Kincaid continued, unbothered. "Rowan Hale, compliance auditor, federal contractor. Known for thoroughness, not ambition. 17 completed audits last quarter. No formal complaints, no scandals." A faint smile crept into his tone. "You don't make waves. You keep things clean." Rowan's mouth went dry. He hadn't told anyone that last part. "You've misunderstood," Rowan said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I don't belong in whatever this is." Brax shifted again, closer now. Rowan could feel the solidity of him, the unspoken promise of presence. His breathing slowed to match Brax's without permission. Kincaid laughed softly. "Oh, Mr. Hale, you belong more than anyone in that room." Silence stretched, heavy, deliberate. "The triplets," Kincaid went on, almost fondly, "are liabilities, smart ones, dangerous ones, but liabilities all the same. They've been trying to correct the system from the inside." His voice sharpened. "That never ends well." Rowan turned his head slightly, looking up at Brax. Brax didn't meet his eyes this time. He was listening. calculating. And you, Kincaid said, are leverage. The word settled into Rowan's chest like a weight. You see, Kincaid continued, when things go wrong, the public needs a narrative, a neutral party, someone who didn't know, someone whose signature appears in all the right places. Rowan's hands curled into fists. You're framing me. Kincaid hummed. Framing is such an ugly word. I prefer assigning responsibility. The lights dimmed slightly, just enough to unsettle. Brax moved fully into Rowan's space, then, not touching, but close enough that Rowan's shoulder brushed his arm. It was an unmistakable line drawn, a boundary. Kincaid noticed. His amusement sharpened. Careful, he warned lightly. Attachment complicates things. Rowan swallowed. His heart pounded hard enough to hurt. What do you want? Rowan asked. A pause. Longer this time. I want usefulness, Kincaid said at last, and cooperation, because no one leaves room 909 without becoming useful. The intercom clicked off. The room felt hollowed out in its wake. Rowan stood there, boxed in by men who hadn't threatened him once, and a voice that had already decided his role. If you've ever realized someone else was writing your story while you were busy being reasonable, if you've ever felt the ground shift under your sense of choice, don't stop now, because what comes next isn't about escape. It's about who you're willing to protect when silence starts demanding loyalty. The room felt smaller after Kincaid's voice disappeared. Not physically, nothing had moved, but something invisible had tightened, like the air itself had learned how to listen. Rowan became aware of his own breathing again. Too loud, too human. No more talking, Ilya said quietly. It wasn't fear in his voice, it was certainty. Soren was already moving, fingers skimming the seams of the walls, the edges of the table, the underside of the chair Rowan had been sitting on. He didn't explain what he was looking for. He didn't have to. They had all understood the same thing at once. This room wasn't just a trap, it was a mouth. Rowan swallowed and forced himself to stay still. Every instinct screamed to ask questions, to fill the silence before it filled him. That instinct had built his career: clarify, document, report. It had also put him here. Brax raised one hand slightly, palm down. Stop. Rowan obeyed without thinking, the way you do when you realize too late that someone else has already mapped the danger. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time blurred when nothing happened. Then Rowan noticed it. The vent. It sat high on the wall near the ceiling, unremarkable, except one corner didn't sit flush. The screws were new. Too new. Rowan's eyes flicked to it, then away, pretending indifference. His pulse picked up. Soren saw it too. He didn't look directly at the vent. Instead, he tapped the table once. Soft, casual. Ilya nodded. Brax shifted his stance, placing himself half a step closer to Rowan, blocking the vent's line of sight. That was when Rowan understood. Everything was being recorded, not just sound, behavior, reactions, fear. Speaking wasn't communication here, it was evidence. Rowan's throat tightened. He had spent years believing silence meant compliance, that if you didn't object loudly enough, responsibility slid past you. But this silence felt different. It felt deliberate. The intercom crackled faintly. Not a full activation, just feedback. A test. No one spoke. Rowan's heart pounded so hard he was certain it could be heard through the walls. He forced himself to slow his breathing, matching Brax's again. In, out. Controlled. Minutes dragged. Then the intercom clicked on fully. Interesting, Kincaid said. You've gone quiet. No response. I don't recommend that strategy, Kincaid continued, mild as ever. Silence creates assumptions. Still nothing. Rowan felt sweat gather at the base of his spine. Every part of him wanted to explain, to justify, to fix. Brax glanced at him. Not for reassurance, not for permission, for trust. Rowan closed his mouth. The silence stretched longer this time, thicker, weaponized. Kincaid sighed softly. Very well. If you won't speak, we'll escalate. The lights flickered once, twice. Rowan's breath caught. Brax's hand lifted, just slightly, two fingers brushing Rowan's wrist. Barely contact, a grounding point. Stay. The intercom clicked off. The room didn't relax. It waited. If you've ever learned too late that the safest thing you could do was stop explaining yourself, if you've ever realized silence could be a choice instead of a failure, stay with this, because the next decision won't be about words at all, and someone in this room is already preparing to take the blame. The countdown started without a sound. No alarm, no flashing red numbers, just a subtle change in the room's pressure, like the air had accepted a decision Rowan hadn't agreed to yet. The lights dimmed to emergency levels. 9 minutes. Rowan felt it in his chest before he saw it on Brax's face. Brax straightened. Not tense, not rushed. Resolved. The intercom came back to life, Kincaid's voice smooth with satisfaction. "You forced my hand. Permanent lockdown protocol initiated. This room will seal completely in 10 minutes." Rowan's breath stuttered. His eyes darted to the door, then the walls, then back to the men who still looked terrifyingly calm. Soren swore under his breath and moved toward the door panel. Ilya followed, already bracing his shoulder against the frame, testing resistance. Nothing budged. "Brax," Rowan whispered before he could stop himself. Brax didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, out of Ilya's shadow, out of the protective formation they'd held since the door first locked. And he spoke. "Yes," Brax said, voice steady, deliberate. "I authorized the shell transfers." Rowan froze. Soren turned sharply. "Brax!" "I approved the offshore rerouting," Brax continued, louder now. Clear, careful, each word placed like a stone. "I knew exactly where the money was going and who it would hurt." Rowan's heart slammed against his ribs. This wasn't panic, this was strategy. "Brax, stop!" Rowan said, stepping forward instinctively. His voice cracked. "They're recording." "I know." Brax finally looked at him then. Really looked. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, just something quiet and immovable. Acceptance. Rowan understood in a sick, dizzy rush. Brax was feeding Kincaid what he wanted. A confession. A clean villain. A body to bury. "Brax," Rowan said again, softer now. "You didn't do those things?" Brax didn't deny it. He only held Rowan's gaze for one unbearable second, long enough for Rowan to feel the weight of being chosen over. Then Soren moved. He grabbed a chair and slammed it into the ceiling sprinkler head with brutal precision. Metal screeched. Water exploded downward, drenching the room in seconds. The fiber junction sparked. Ilya roared, forcing his shoulder into the door mechanism again, muscles straining, tendons standing out like cables. Water pooled at their feet. The lights flickered violently. Kincaid shouted through the intercom, his composure cracking. "What are you doing? Stop!" The sound cut into static. Rowan stood there, soaked, shaking, watching everything fall apart because one man had decided his life was expendable. And Rowan hated himself for the delay, because for half a second, just half, he had still been thinking like an auditor, about rules, about procedures, about what he was allowed to do. Brax staggered slightly as the room shook, but he stayed upright, protecting them. Still. Rowan stepped forward then, not as a witness, not as a neutral party, as someone who had been saved once too often by silence. If you've ever watched someone take the fall while you stayed quiet, if you've ever let someone else bleed because it was easier, don't look away now. Because Rowan is about to choose, and once he does, nothing about room 909 will ever be clean again. Chaos didn't arrive loudly. It arrived in fragments, water dripping through ceiling panels, the low grind of metal under strain. Ilya's breath, ragged now, as he drove his shoulder into the door again and again. Soren braced the frame with both hands, knuckles splitting, teeth clenched like pain was a language he refused to speak. The countdown returned. 8 minutes. Rowan stood in the middle of it, soaked, shaking, useless. This was the moment training never prepared him for, the space between policy and people, where rules stopped protecting anyone. Brax swayed once, then caught himself. His false confession still hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, waiting to be harvested. Rowan saw it clearly now. If he did nothing, the story would be simple. 3 powerful alpha criminals, 1 clean sacrifice, 1 auditor who followed procedure. Everyone would understand it. Everyone would move on. "Rowan?" Soren's voice cut through the noise. "If you have anything, now?" Rowan's hand hovered over his credentials. Federal access, limited bandwidth, a dying fiber line. It wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't be complete. It wouldn't even be safe. It would only be true. And truth, he was learning too late, is never neutral. He looked at Brax. Brax didn't nod, didn't plead. He simply stood there, taking the weight of what he'd chosen, as if pain were a duty he'd accepted long ago. Rowan felt something inside him fracture. He remembered the photographs, the families, the silence he'd certified with a signature and a shrug. Neutrality had never kept anyone safe. "Ilya," Rowan said, voice steady now. "Hold the door." Ilya glanced back once, then nodded and pushed harder, muscle screaming against steel. Rowan knelt in the pooling water and snapped open his credential case. His hands shook as he routed power manually, fingers slipping, heart racing. This would flag him, end his career, possibly end him. But for the first time, the risk felt honest. "Partial transmission," Rowan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Name, source, motive." He spoke clearly. "Marrow Kincaid, board member, shadow investor, orchestrated containment in room 909 to erase liabilities and manufacture confession." The room shuddered. 6 minutes. The intercom screamed back to life, Kincaid's voice no longer smooth. "You don't know what you're doing." Rowan didn't stop. "I'm documenting coercion, illegal surveillance, and attempted permanent detention," he continued. "This report is incomplete, but it exists." The fiber line sparked once, then held. Soren let out a breath that sounded like disbelief. Brax closed his eyes. 5 minutes. Ilya roared, forcing the door another inch. Metal screamed, the seal cracked. Rowan finished the transmission with shaking hands and slammed the case shut. There was no triumph, no relief, only the certainty that he could never go back. The door burst open with 1 second left on the invisible clock. Cold air rushed in. Sirens followed. Shouts, boots. Rowan slumped against the wall, heart hammering, soaked and alive and changed. As they were pulled apart, hands on shoulders, commands barked. Rowan caught Brax's eye one last time. No words passed between them. None were needed. Because some choices don't ask if you're ready. They ask who you're willing to become when staying silent would be easier. And if this chapter made your chest tighten, if you've ever stayed quiet when it mattered, don't scroll away. The room may have opened, but what happens after is where the cost truly begins. Sirens replaced silence. Rowan barely remembered leaving room 909, only the cold rush of air, the press of hands guiding him forward, the way the world suddenly acted as if he mattered. The triplets were taken separately, not violently, not gently either. Too many witnesses now, too much attention for clean endings. Marrow Kincaid vanished before sunrise. 3 days later, Rowan resigned. No speech, no justification. He testified instead, about loopholes disguised as policy, about how neutrality wasn't passive, it was profitable, about how systems didn't fail people, they selected who was allowed to fall through them. The Calderone Hotel announced renovations within the month. Brax never contacted him. That absence hurt more than Rowan expected. Not because he wanted anything promised, but because some connections are forged where fear strips pretense bare, where protection is offered without asking permission. Weeks later, an unmarked envelope arrived. Inside were architectural plans stamped with city approval codes. Room 909, decommissioned. The room no longer existed. Walls absorbed, door removed, officially erased. Rowan stood across the street from the hotel that evening, watching people enter without knowing what had once been sealed above them. He understood then, survival hadn't been escaping. It had been choosing who he would become when silence was safer. Across the street, someone leaned against a parked car, still observant. Brax. They didn't approach. They didn't speak. Some bonds don't ask for closure. They respect distance. Rowan turned away first, not because he was finished, but because he wasn't waiting anymore. Some rooms don't change you. They reveal who you are when the door doesn't open. And if you've ever been tested by silence, ask yourself this: would you have stayed quiet or chosen who you'd be when no one was watching?